Our final presentation for the day is going to be from Mark Robison, who will shed some light on our ever-changing weather patterns. Mark is a Canadian adventurer, storm chaser, and meteorologist. He has chased and been chased by tornadoes across Canada and the United States. Mark has been intercepting hurricanes since 2005 and has documented many major storms, including Katrina, Ike, Sandy, Michael, and Ian. He also chased innumerable ice storms, blizzards, and snowstorms. Mark's adventurous spirit has taken him around the globe. He has witnessed avalanches, experienced minus 110 degrees Celsius temperatures, swam in the both Arctic and Antarctic oceans, and jumped into 4 volcanoes. So Mark is also an on-air personality at the Weather Network and co-hosts the show Storm Hunters. So welcome, Mark.
Yeah, and I've had like no sleep, so that's why I've got the monster beside me. So if I both look absolutely exhausted and caffeinated at the same time, that's why. Because I've been rushing. It's been a bit of a wild time the last couple of weeks. I've been storm after storm in Ontario, and now I'm out to here. And oh, there we go. Oh, yay! Now I don't have to look up there. I'm going to anyway, but I can see it in 2 spots now. But yes, after all that, though, I'm not just an idiot who jumps into volcanoes. I'm actually a meteorologist as well, so I've been doing meteorology for quite a few years. I did way too much schooling, just a lot of math. I don't recommend doing meteorology if you don't enjoy math. But really what it comes down to, though, is I want to talk to you a little bit about the potential for climate change. We're talking about, what's going to be happening as we go forward, and we all know that farmers, sort of absolutely depend on the weather. And I hear this all the time, and I always get immediately people asking, so what's going to happen next week? I've actually had people ask me, so next July, my daughter's wedding is on July 25th. Can you tell me what temperature it's going to be? And this is January. So, yeah. But first off, I'm just as we go forward here, just to give you an idea of who you're actually getting. And we're not got sound, so I'm going to bring the sound down.
Roads. There were many records that were shattered by this storm.
This is also to wake everybody up.
Just, by the amount of organizing and labor it takes.
It is go time.
There's the one volcano.
The danger rating remains high.
This is crazy.
That's my co-host Jack.
I can't believe this.
Oh yeah.
Just amazing.
That was me breaking my foot.
Storm Hunters, Season 2, only on the Weather Network.
And that very last shot was just before we almost got arrested by the Secret Service outside the White House. So yeah, that was a fun day. But really, what I want to talk to you a little bit about is climate change, what we're looking at, whether we can tell much about what's going to be happening this summer. And I'm going to make everybody wait till the very end, but I do have the latest seasonal forecast from our meteorologist back at the Weather Network, and I'm going to show you that at the end. It's going to make everyone stay here for a little while. But yeah, this is literally hot off the presses because literally Doug sent it to me this morning, so I put it in right at the end. So that's about as updated as we can, and you may or may not hate me for it. So we'll see. So when we talk about climate change, what are we looking at? Well, we've got a bunch of different things that we can sort of take a look at in a scientific sense, and we can take and sort of understand what's going on. I've been all over the world. I've seen the effects and the impacts right across the world, from Antarctica to the Arctic, from Mount Everest to Vanuatu in the South Pacific, and I've seen it right across the whole world. So it's definitely happening. How it happens and what kind of effect it's going to have on us here, this is the big question. But we can actually look at some of the different indicators. And we can sort of, try to, this is a very, you look at it this way, I look at this in university, and it's really cool, and we get all sorts of data and do all sorts of math. But really what you want to know is what's actually going to be happening. What are you going to have to deal with? And we're going to get into that in a little bit. So the one thing I always get, and this happens all the time. So if you can't tell me what's happening next week, how can you tell me what's going to be happening in the climate? It's a little bit different. Weather is just what's happening right now, and climate is the conditions that are over a period of time. So it's actually a little bit easier to say, yes, this is what's going to happen in the climate over a long period of time than the thunderstorm's going to hit you next week. The last presenter was talking about the difference between being the rain gauge in Charlottetown and just, I'm assuming, a couple of kilometers away. Yeah, that's pretty normal, and that's very difficult to do, and very difficult to sort of nail that down. If anybody's got questions for me afterwards, I'll try to explain a little bit of that. But what are we talking about when we talk about this sort of thing? When we talk about climate change? Well, what we're talking about is when we talk about short-term impacts versus long-term impacts, it's really the long-term impacts that overall are going to be more important than short-term. And in fact, short-term stuff, and I get this all the time, and I'll talk a little bit about it later, is that I always see on this news or on the media, and it drives me absolutely crazy, this hurricane is because of climate change. Everybody knows what Fiona was, right? I'll talk a little bit about that in a bit, actually in just a moment. I see all the time, Fiona happened because of climate change. No, that's not what we're talking about. If we have to look at a long-term chunk of data. If we had a Fiona every single year for the next 20 years, then yeah, that's probably climate change. But if we have a one-off event like Fiona and they say, well, that was because of climate change, no, that's not exactly how it works. So what we have to look at is how it affects the overall, long-term sort of thing. And when we're talking about growing, we're talking about farming, we are looking at, what are we going to do in the future? What's going to happen in the future? So everybody recognizes that shot, I'm sure. Yeah. Everybody. My co-host Jacqueline, which is everyone always asks, well, why? Where's Jacqueline? Well, they don't want to see me; they want to see Jacqueline. Jack was actually here, just on the North Shore for Fiona. I was down in Lewisburg, and I'm going to show you a little bit of that. So this had a pretty huge impact right across the Maritimes. It was one of the strongest storms that we've seen in Canada, and I'll get into that in a second. But you can see that, it had just such a huge effect right across there. This wasn't a true hurricane when it struck, but it had Category 2 winds in it, hurricane, Category 2. Absolutely incredible. The amount of damage that we saw right across both Nova Scotia and PEI, and even into Newfoundland, was absolutely sort of unprecedented. So what was it like? Let me see if we can get this one going. There we go. So this is Lewisburg. I was down in Lewisburg for this one, and this is. Let's see what happened there. There we go. Okay, sorry. So it was a September 24th. Max sustained winds on that were 165 kilometers an hour, gusts to almost 180 kilometers an hour, and I had to put in, of course, Teacup Rock was destroyed, and I had only found out about that later. And severe damage, of course, to the north side of PEI, and especially to the dune system. I've actually talked to a few people already who've said they've lost 20 to 30 feet of beachfront property from Fiona. They were sort of taking a look at the difference between the two of them. The hurricane itself, or the storm itself, was 10 millibars stronger. So 10 millibars was stronger than the basically the strongest we've ever seen. So the deepest pressure we've ever seen in Canada was 940 millibars. This one went down to 931. And the lower that is, the stronger the storm. So if this was an unprecedented storm, absolutely destructive. And this was only the first one in a couple of weeks that I went through. So this is one of the issues that we find. This is actually what we call storm surge. This was right in Lewisburg. So we're actually seeing storm surge beginning to make its way up. this becomes a bit of an issue when we have the storm surge happening again and again and again, because you end up with saltwater intrusion. We're going to get into that in a little bit. Not as big a deal if you're a little bit further away from the ocean, or if you're a little more elevated, but it can become a problem if it happens over and over again. Oh, and I love this shot. To give you an idea of some of the winds. Yeah, that poor guy actually filmed. It was great. I actually filmed a little bit more of him, but he was trying to get just over into the door there and literally couldn't make it there. Now, he got to stand out there for a couple of minutes. I was actually on air for almost 8 hours straight. Jacqueline as well. Both of us completely lost our voices by the end of the storm. And this, again, as I said, was one of the most unprecedented storms, one of the most historical storms for the Maritimes and for actually all of Canada. Again, absolutely destructive for this area. And we had effects all the way out through the eastern parts of all of Canada. So if we look at some of the damage that we're looking at, there's a tremendous amount of short-term damage. Jacqueline was actually here, and she said she got basically trapped here for a couple of days before she couldn't actually get out. I got out. I was on Cape Breton, and I managed to, even though we had a flat tire, which was like an oops. I kind of drove over some debris from a house that came apart and had a flat tire. We managed to get out of Cape Breton, even though all of that area had power out. You guys probably had power out for, a couple of weeks? Some places? 3 weeks, yeah. Yeah, and that's not unheard of at all. I mean, the only time we see damage that sort of that extent is in hurricanes or potentially in the ice storms. You don't get ice storms here as quite as often. Quebec and Ontario are really well known for ice storms, and those areas can lose power for quite a long time. This one, though, when we have this sort of extensive damage, it's not limited to just your place. It's the whole area, and that becomes a big issue. In Ontario, I often deal with tornadoes and thunderstorms, and quite often I'll be talking to individual farmers, and they've had their barns taken out. One guy had his drying kilns basically wiped out, and he had to then take all of his harvest, bring it over to his friend's place. They were drying it there, but that added to his bottom line in a big way. So it really dropped his profit margin in an extensive. But when you're dealing with something like this, when you're dealing with major storms out here on the East Coast, it's affecting everybody. So it's not easy to just go over to your neighbor's place and get them to give you a hand. Unfortunately, when it affects the infrastructure, you end up with greater costs. So if we look here, if we're just looking at, say, aquaculture, we're looking at $70 million worth in damage. Right now, we're sitting at $800 million in damage in insured losses. That's about half of the damage itself. We're also looking about the same in uninsured losses. This is a little harder to actually to look at and try to figure out those numbers. So it's a rough estimate that we're looking at well over $1 billion in damage. We're starting to see a greater impact of weather events across Canada, across the United States, with just more and more expensive storms happening. And this is where I often get people asking me, well, is that climate change? And I have to say, no, that isn't necessarily directly climate change. It's actually the fact that we're just building more and more into storm areas. If we look at Southern Ontario, which is where I come from, we've had this great idea of building Barrie right in the middle of where all of our tornadoes go. So we're seeing a lot more damage there. So this is where a lot of that and those numbers are coming from. Climate change just adds on top of that. So if you want to see the big one, though, this is my favorite. We will never see one this strong in Canada. We got to Category 2 winds on Fiona. That's as strong as I think we'll ever see in Canada. So we're not going to see anything like this, but I did want to give you an example, and I love showing off my shots because it does show how much of an idiot I am. So this one, though, look at the numbers that we just saw. We saw, $1.5, $1.6 billion damage to Canada. $113 billion of damage in the United States, and in the United States and some of the Caribbean islands. I was in, let me see if this laser will work. I was basically sitting right there as this one came in. So this one was, so you can see the eye, I went right through the eye. It was great, and I'll show you what it was like. So usually when these hurricanes come in, the front side of the hurricane is usually a lot stronger than the back side. So we went through that. Jacqueline and I were down in Punta Gorda. We were with the Weather Channel guys. Everybody was there. It was really amazing. Everybody was showing. I was sick as a dog, but I didn't tell anybody about that. I got really sick, and Maritimes gave me something nasty. So thank you. I appreciate that. So we were sitting right there. The front side, it wasn't too bad, pretty strong. Okay, not bad. The eye went directly over top of us, and we said, oh, the backside, nah, it's not going to be that strong. And then this happened. So the winds you're looking at there are about 200. That's the Americans are idiots. Oh, is there any Americans in the audience? I have to know before I start insulting people. Okay, and there's no Americans? Oh, this is great. I'm going to have some fun with this. The Americans also always forget that there's a country north of them and weather keeps going into the north. So yeah, that's the winds you were seeing there were about 200 and 250 kilometers an hour. And then, of course, you always get the guys from Florida driving through this because I don't know. This is me actually up in the parking garage, and this is what it looked like looking down. So if anybody has, like a winter place down in Florida, sometimes this is what you're going to have to be dealing with. There are a lot of Canadians down there. It's kind of funny. So there you go. That's about 200, 250 kilometers an hour. And we're not actually even dealing with the worst of the. This is the really sexy stuff. Right? You get to get on air and you talk about stuff that's going on. I was actually live, and my cameraman's filming, and then all of a sudden he started laughing as we got off air, and I said, "What are you laughing at?" He said, "A recycling bin just went right behind you, right through the shot." I was like, "That's cool." So this is, it's really cool, and it's neat to see, but we're not dealing with the bigger damage, and that's the storm surge, and that's something that was dealt with right across the Maritimes when Fiona came in. We're not dealing with storm surge like this. In Katrina, for instance, I was dealing 26 feet of water, so that would fill up this entire room completely. With this one, I was dealing, or with Fiona, I was dealing with a few feet of water, but it definitely came up. Also depends on tides, et cetera, et cetera. So that storm surge is what really does the damage, and so that's one of the things that we're watching for, and this is going to essentially climate change is going to exacerbate these problems. So again, this is where I go back to, is this climate change? This is the Fort McMurray fires that I was in, hugely damaging to that area. Not a lot of agriculture up there, but it did cut off a lot of the guys that were working in the oil patch up there, and it was extremely damaging to the town itself. Severe storms, this is the other one. This is one of these things, is this great evidence for it? And I'm going to show you in a second. Of course, thunderstorms, I always love showing these shots off. These are just some of my shots that I've done. These are my favorite for the Weather Network because we put these on air and everybody freaks right out and we get really high ratings and it's fantastic. And they're not even that dangerous. This is what we call a gust front. You guys may have seen some of these around here. You might have seen them. These are great. They look terrifying, but they're actually not that bad. They're a little bit windy. Having said that, in Southern Ontario, well, last year now, oh my God, I keep forgetting it's another year, we had a derecho event, and that's basically a line of thunderstorms that just tore across all of Southern Ontario, and those storms actually started in Kansas and ended in northern Quebec. Could you see something like that here? It's possible, a little more unlikely. But it's something, again, that one did almost $1 billion worth of damage across Canada. Are these things happening more often? Potentially. And of course, this is Antarctica, and this is my buddy George filming my feet. I can't remember why, but there's a leopard seal sitting back here. But this is what we always hear about when we talk about climate change. is the Arctic and Antarctic. This is another example of major destructive events. Flooding is a huge problem. This was actually down in South Carolina, and it was extraordinarily destructive to some of the towns, Charleston and that area. Having shown you all that, where do we really get our evidence from? It's this is the I'm going to call this is the sexy end of the scale. Everybody wants to see these shots, and we get lots of our ratings out of hurricanes and tornadoes. But really, the real evidence and the real problem comes from this end. Drought is a big problem. Severe extreme precipitation events, another huge one. Coastal flooding, heat waves. These are the ones that we can see, and these are the ones that are giving us that evidence. We can't say, again, if we go back to this end, I'm going back to that thing, saying, are one-off events good evidence? No, they're not great. But if we look at this end, and of course this is the end we're more concerned about, is this, where we're seeing this sort of thing. The one thing, climate change for me is fantastic. I'm loving it because it's giving me lots of really interesting weather events. But I always say to people, yeah, it's great for me, but it's really bad for farmers because I like eating 3 times a day. It's just something I try to do once in a while. And this is the bigger, for me, the bigger issue. Where's all the warming going? Well, it's especially relevant when we talk about this area of Canada. All of that heat is going into the ocean. We're not really seeing it, that much, into these areas, but it's really this. And of course, when we get out here, this becomes a problem. And I'm going to get into that in a second and talk about why Fiona was as strong as it was. I almost said she. We're not supposed to say that anymore. And of course, when we look across the planet, what happens over here has a direct effect on what happens over here. Everything is linked. We can't just sort of say, we can't just ignore what goes on in the Pacific Ocean and say, that's the other side of the continent, I don't have to worry about that. It has a big effect, and actually, if you look this year, it's having a huge effect. How much snow have we got outside? Yeah, is that normal? I was here a couple of years ago, literally in this town, and I went through a snowstorm over on the other side of the town by the Home Hardware. I was at the hotel there, stuck there for 2 days, and I found out what storm chips are. Literally that time. I did not know what that was until I went through that storm. That was really cool. Thank you. I love the Maritimes. You have no idea how much I love the East Coast. It really kills me when I'm not out here, and because of COVID, I haven't been able to come out here, so I've been coming out here constantly, so I appreciate everybody out here, and thank you so much. The snow that day, I could walk from the parking lot up to the top of the hotel without any trouble at all. That's how much snow was falling. So when I flew in, I drove in the other day. Last night I drove and right down the area where I said, I remember them pulling cars out of the ditch right here because there was so much snow. It's a little unusual this year, and it's because we've actually had a real cooling on this in the Pacific. And so what ends up happening is we get a big ridge of basically the jet stream sort of going up here and then coming up sort of like this and then going through this area, which means that we're getting a lot of storms coming through this area. Southern Ontario, this is why I've been insanely busy. I don't know if anybody was paying attention to what was going on in Ontario near Toronto. I know I'm from Toronto, so Toronto's the center of the universe. I'm sorry. I'm going to apologize right now. This is a very Canadian thing to do. But there was one of the nastiest snowstorms I've ever been through in Fort Erie, right near Buffalo, right at the one end of Lake Erie. Lake Erie is still open. That is not normal, and it's because, again, we're seeing this cooling temperature here, which is forcing the jet stream to do something a little bit unusual. I was talking with the hotel manager here, and he was saying that the ice in the bay has only happened in the last week or so. Again, that is as far as he said, that's really weird. Again, I'm from Southern Ontario, and I pay a lot of attention to the Great Lakes. It has a big effect on our storms, and they're all open, and they're still open. And that's, again, one of the problems. So if we see all that heat going into the oceans, especially the Pacific Oceans, we may see, again, this much more variable weather, and that's sort of the whole thing. It's a little bit of a sneak peek here. So I know Toronto's the center of the universe. I'm going to try really hard not to talk about it. I'm going to try and sort of look. I'm sort of looking out here when we're on the Weather Network. We do watch the Maritimes because, again, the Maritimes is almost like a second home to me. I love it out here on the East Coast. What are we seeing? Well, when I talked about the fact that the ice has only come in the last little while, that's a big issue. When I look at the Great Lakes, that's, again, as I said, that's where I come from. The Great Lakes have had ice, no ice there. What ends up happening? You end up with battering waves on the coast all year round. That is spectacularly bad for areas in southern Ontario, but it's also spectacularly bad out here when the shorelines are not getting a rest. They're just constantly, being battered. So we're seeing that increased erosion. We're seeing saltwater intrusion, and not more hurricanes. We're seeing the potential for more intense hurricanes, and I'm going to get into that in a second. And we could see an increase in temperature. Doesn't seem like much, but it does have a big effect. Here's where I'm going to use this as an example. This is not necessarily something that's going to be directly affecting us here. We're not talking about Tornado Alley out here. You do get tornadoes here. I have seen pictures literally out of this area of tornadoes. It does happen. It's extraordinarily rare. What I do want to look at here, though, is two areas of Canada where we sort of have our little tornado alleys here. These two areas, again, are this area is highly populated, so we do see a lot of examples coming out of this area. And of course, we've got the Tornado Alley of Canada, which is the prairies. Again, not a big deal for around here. But the big problem is this graph. And this sort of puts it all into perspective. I know you're probably all looking at it going, I have no idea what I'm looking at. And don't worry, I had to get my PhD, my friend who has a PhD, who's far more intelligent than I am. Not a low bar to get over, or not a high bar to get over. This is the big issue. What we're seeing, instead of a change in the number of storms, what we're seeing is a clustering effect. So we're seeing, say, we're going to take July as an example. We see 30 storms in July. We're still seeing 30 storms in July. But before we really, climate change began to really bite, what we would see is those 30 storms one a day. Now what we're seeing is nothing for a while, 10 storms in one day, and then nothing again, and then 10 storms in another day. So what we're actually seeing is a clustering of the events. That is a big problem. For me, it's great because it means I only have to go out and work 2 days a week. No, they actually make me do other stuff. And the one thing cool is I'm a meteorologist, so I can be wrong 70% of the time, and they still have to pay me. What it is not great for, of course, is farming. If we're talking about areas like, say, southern Ontario, or if we're talking about out here, we don't have to worry too much about irrigation because we just get a pretty regular amount of rain. It just happens, no big deal. The problem that we're seeing now is that all the water is falling in a couple of days. Well, that's great, except we don't have a way to capture that, and it runs off and it's gone. It's no longer available. That is the big problem. That is the increase that we're starting to see. And this is something that we've been studying for a little while, and we're really beginning to notice that. The other thing we're seeing, again, not as big an issue out here, but it could potentially become an issue, is we're seeing those severe thunderstorms beginning to shift out of those areas of Kansas and Texas and begin to move towards the northeast. That includes Ontario, but it also includes the East Coast. It does include the Maritimes. We're starting to see more and more thunderstorms out here, more severe weather. It's not like everybody out here is worried too much about tornadoes. In the future, we may have to start to watch that. Here's the graph that's one of the ones I really wanted to show. And I'm going to step back so I can see it right here. Normally, when we talked about Fiona, and we sort of saw Fiona coming in, we're not really all that worried because when the storms reach about here, they hit the really cold water and they die out long before they get to the Maritimes. I've been through a few of them. they come in like this and they go ripping past the Maritimes. And here they're moving at about 15, 20 kilometers an hour. So pretty slow, takes a little while for them to come through. When they come past here, they're usually moving at about 70. So the entire storm might be 3 hours. I've done a couple of storms where I've literally sat at Peggy's Cove and watched the storm go by in 3 hours. It was really neat. Huge waves and it was gone. Did some damage, not too bad, not too big a deal. Not really an extensively damaging to a huge area. The problem with Fiona came in, that normal warm boundary was actually 400 kilometers north. So it stayed strong all the way up, and rather than going sort of ripping across, moving this direction, it came in and stopped. And what it actually did was it drove those winds around the backside. So those winds were coming around here, and it was staying strong as it was as it came in here. So I was shocked, to be quite honest. We were not expecting it to be that strong. The models were telling us that it's going to be strong when it hits, and I said, you will know where you can stick that model. That's not going to be happening. Turns out I was wrong because Mother Nature likes to mess with me and mess with everybody else, of course. So this may be something we have to watch from now on. Are we going to see that warm water being driven further north? But again, I go back to that original thing that I was saying. Is this an absolute example of climate change? Not necessarily. What we are doing is we're loading the dice. So what we're saying is, if this is where it is normally, and this is where it was for 1 year, well, if this is rolling a 7 and this is rolling a 12 on 2 dice, we load those dice, that 12 is going to come up more and more often, and that's one of the big issues that we have to deal with. So what are some of the problems? If we specifically talk about agriculture itself, waterborne diseases, an issue, of course. Flooded or inaccessible fields because of those extreme precipitation events. And this is something that I've seen time and time again, from Texas to Kansas to southern Ontario, whole fields underwater, just absolutely inaccessible. You can't get anything out on the field, and you basically have to write that off. If you're looking at it at harvest time, suddenly that field has been wrecked. If you're looking at when you're planting and you can't get stuff in, that's a huge problem. And I'm not talking about the fields being a little bit wet. I'm talking about some of the places I've been in Texas. No joke, the water was this deep over huge fields, and it wasn't a day or two. It actually sat on the field for a very long period of time because they hadn't built those fields to take that. There was no way to divert that water. There was no way to get that water off the fields because they haven't had to deal with it before. Here's the other one, of course. As we warm, we're going to see the drought frequency potentially increase. With that lack of water, of course, this is one of the issues that we're looking at. How do we deal with that lack of water? And of course, then we get invasive species, species that may not have normally been here. Now we're seeing them. We're seeing it in southern Ontario. We're seeing one of the issues, again, soybean rust is one of those ones that's starting to show up a lot more in southern Ontario. And of course, heat stress on animals. Soils, this is where we get back to it. And I've talked to a few farmers in southern Ontario. They've said, we've had either the soils are too dry or too wet. They're not sitting in that perfect zone. What's happening is the soils are extremely wet, say in the spring, and then they're way too dry throughout the summer, and then we go straight back into wet. So even pulling stuff off the field has become a problem. Is it all bad? This is where I always get, I didn't want to depress everybody. I wanted to look into some of the other parts of it because I could just, make everybody just absolutely get completely upset and completely depressed, but I try not to do that. We could see a longer growing season. How do we deal with that? Well, we can, get different crops in the ground, look at which ones can tolerate a longer period of time or tolerate salt stress for something. This is the one I love to show, is lessen competition. When we have the droughts are actually showing up a lot in the western areas of the U.S., so they're seeing really decreased amounts of crops coming out of there. So that means that us in Canada, in the Northeast, can take advantage of that. So the prices may be pushed up, but if you've got bumper crops, you're going to be able to take advantage of that and sell at a much higher price point than you normally would, because the guys down in the West. We also can look at it. This is a talk I actually gave just before Russia decided that they wanted the Ukraine. We're seeing a huge amount of agricultural products being pulled off the market because of that. This is again and exacerbate that problem with climate change. They're having issues over there, and if we're seeing a little bit better growing conditions here, again, that pushes that price point up. And of course, I had to put in here, I love my lobster dinners. I know we're not talking about that much aquaculture, but we could see a lot more lobsters, which is cool for me. And my wife, she loves when I bring a lobster back from the East Coast. What does it come down to? Well, it's all about adaptation. We can't stop it. We can't do anything about it at this point. But what we can be is aware of what's going on and start to adapt to the changing conditions. If we are seeing that variability, what do we do? Technologies are coming online all the time. If we're looking at those events, those weather events that are dumping a huge amount of water all at once, how do we capture that for irrigation later? Again, as I said earlier, changing crop types, adaptive field practices. There's a whole bunch of stuff that we can do to adapt to this. If we're talking about, from my point of view, we're talking about, say, urban areas, we stop building everything out of concrete and start to try and, rather than have all that water just flash right off, we're trying to sort of, again, be able to let it slowly come off of urban areas. So there's a lot we can do, but it really comes down to adaptation. And everybody that sort of looks at it, begins to adapt, and understands what's going on, those are the ones that are going to be well positioned to take advantage and are going to make a lot of money. So when your places and when your systems, your fields are producing like crazy, and say the guys in Texas, again, no Americans here? Good. When the idiot Americans decide not to sort of adapt, and yes, I've talked to a lot of them that refuse to adapt, we're going to be making their money. So I said I was going to make everybody wait to the end, okay, for what's going to be happening in the next couple of months. So I can tell you exactly what's going to happen in 2023. It's going to warm up. Maybe. One of the problems that I do joke a little bit about that, but this is what I was talking about our Mets. Giving you an exact forecast of what's going to happen in July is pretty much impossible. But what we do at the Weather Network is try to do seasonal forecasts. And everybody loves to talk about our seasonal forecasts, especially as we get into spring. Now, nobody's allowed to tell anybody outside this room that I showed you this, okay? Because Doug's, he said it's okay to show the farmers, but don't show anybody else. Because we're just about to go in and start forecasting. Unfortunately, we can't say too much just yet. But as everybody has walked outside today, has noticed it's fairly mild. And we just had that quick cold snap a little while ago. When I was in, again, Southern Ontario, yes, I come from Toronto, I'm going to keep saying that. I was in Southern Ontario, we hit minus 22 in Guelph, and that was the coldest it got. Literally all year, that is as cold as it has gotten. That was one day. That is a little unusual for this year. And that should be it for the really, really cold temperatures. However, there's a couple of little things that we're looking at that we can't necessarily assume that winter has done bye-bye to everybody. So we may see the wintry March. May see the March being a little bit colder than, say, the normal, so we may see a few more storms coming through. We're sitting right on that storm track. I've been incredibly busy because the storm track's been sitting through Southern Ontario and parts of Eastern Canada. We've seen the nor'easters come ripping up the coast quite a few times. So that sort of big up and down that we've been seeing this year is likely to continue. And of course, that's what we've got at this point. We can't really look into May and June yet. We will be, as I said, we're going to be literally in the next 2 weeks, sitting down and doing a full breakdown of the entire season. of what's going to be going on. So March 1st is our thing and our actual forecast. So watch the Weather Network on that day. I'm contractually obligated to say that. So I appreciate everybody watching that day, and just tell my boss that yes, I told you that. So again, this is my contractually obligated. Here's the Weather Network stuff right here. And that's, we can always, you can watch the Weather Network. The app, if you've got the app on the phone, as I said, I've been right across Canada from one side to the other, and a lot of people have it on the phone, and I really appreciate that. I will let you know a little secret. Our little radar app is not the best, but we're working on it. Okay? The one that is actually good, and again, I'm not going to put it up here because I get in trouble for it. There's a great program to put on your, a great app on your phone called RadarScope. And RadarScope actually is an up to the minute or up to 6 minutes real-time radar. It's absolutely fantastic because you can quite literally see the thunderstorms coming across. So if you can harvest or plant really, really quick just before the thunderstorm gets there, it will tell you what's going on. And it will actually capture the storm moving. Our Weather Network one takes where the storm is and just says, oh, it's not going to move, it's just going to go in this direction. So again, you didn't hear that from me. So I will say thank you very much, and if anybody's got any questions, please feel free to ask. And if the question is what's the temperature going to be tomorrow, I think it's actually going to warm up a little bit. And yes, we're going to get a little bit of snow and a little bit of rain.
Yes. So you talk about the Earth's temperature is warming up slowly, and the glaciers are melting, sea levels are rising. My question is, the Earth is millions of years old. Does the Earth take cycles of weather patterns that are rolling all the time, hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago?
Oh yeah, if we go back millions of years, it was way warmer than it was now. And it's also been way colder than it is now. The biggest issue and the biggest evidence for it is that it's happening so bloody quick. There's something called the Milankovitch cycles, which are about 300,000 years, and that's sort of the temperature of the Earth will sort of do this because of the way how close the Earth is to the sun. It definitely changes, but that's over 300,000 years. What's happening now is like a meteorite strike, and that's the big issue. Is it's happening so fast. We're lucky because humans are really, really good at adapting. It's one thing we do really, really well, and that's my thing, is that we have a chance to adapt if we sort of look at what's coming and what we can see. And again, it's that variability that concerns me more than anything. We will see it warmer, but we're also going to see it colder. But it's the question is, and the worry for me is that huge swing.
Yes, the slide you showed why Fiona kind of caught us off guard with it was that you said we had another roughly 400 kilometers of warmer water than normal. And that chunk of cool water we used to have was kind of something that softened the impact of a lot of storms. Is this, why was it warmer? Is this a one-off, or is there a trend happening in the flow currents that is going to continue to bring warmer water up?
That's quite literally the $1.5 billion question.
And I also think lobsters probably do better in colder water. So I'm not sure, but it may mean we'll have lobster season will open a month earlier.
Yeah.
Which is a good thing.
Yeah. Oh, good for me. Yeah. I actually did dumping day. I actually was out with the crews on dumping day one year. That was absolutely wild to be a part of. Yeah. I mean, that's a good question. I mean, it literally is the $1.5 billion question. Is it a one-off? Well, we don't know for sure, and I don't want to say, absolutely we're going to see this absolute loss of temperatures. We may see a big change. It had a lot to do with the way the El Nino pattern was last year, so that we got a little bit more warming than we expected, that little bit further north. We may see an opposite of that because La Nina is fading right now, so that Pacific water is beginning to warm up, so we may not see that next year, so you may get that buffer back. And that's kind of what I hope for, because these high impact storms, if you have a high impact storm every year, it's going to be a huge problem, because even the rebuilding process takes so long, and that's my big concern. Any other questions? Usually the other one is, how come you get the weather wrong all the time? Again, I'm allowed to be wrong 70% of the time. They still have to pay me. All right, thanks so much. Hopefully that was useful for everybody. And yeah, if you've got any questions, I'll be around for at least a little while.
Great. Thank you, Mark. So that officially concludes today's session. I'd like to thank all the speakers and you guys in attendance today. Hopefully you found some value in the presentations. Please be sure to join us again tomorrow for the Soil and Crop Conference, which starts at 8:45 a.m. We'll have another great day of speakers and topics, as well as the Technology Forum and the awards presentation for the Soil and Crop. Just another reminder to please fill out your evaluation forms in your folders if you can, or complete it online. We really appreciate the feedback. And if you're coming tomorrow, please remember to bring your name tag back because you'll need it to get into the meal again tomorrow. So with that, everyone drive safe and thanks a lot for coming.